Shalom, and welcome to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. This is a recording of a Shabbat sermon with Rabbi Adam Kligfeld.
There was some consternation in our family and amongst our friends and community when we came to name and then spell the name of our second child. My Hebrew name is Adam. Javi's Hebrew name is Chava. Adam and Eve have been a theme in our relationship. And we thought that we should have a child that reflected that. And we were not going to name any child Cain or Abel or Snake. Seth is nice, but we wanted Hebrew names, and the Hebrew name for Seth is Sheth. Not really what we wanted. So we decided to name, as many of you know, our second child Aden, as in the Garden of Eden. We spelled it Ayden. And the reason we spelled it that way is because I'm a grammar nerd, and the two vowels in Hebrew under the ayin and the daled, no matter what the Israelis in the room say is the pronunciation, the two vowels under the ayin and the daled are different. The vowel under the daled is a segol. The sound is eh. The vowel under the ayin is a tseireh, and the sound is a. And except in Israeli Hebrew, we differentiate between them. Israelis would say that Eden. It's two vowels the same. But a proper biblical pronunciation of that word would be Aden. And we wanted to write the English letters in such a way that would induce as much confusion as possible and occasionally a proper pronunciation. We told people it rhymes with playpen. It was the only English word we could find where there was a stress on the first syllable and the two vowel sounds were A and E and end in N. Playpen. Works in my brain. I remember just having this conversation with one of a colleague and a friend, Rabbi Gordon Tucker, who was discussing that he also had a grandchild named Aden, and his son also spelled it Ayden, and it's the exact right way to do it. He rejected the Israeli pronunciation of Eden. In fact, he says there is a perfectly good Hebrew word that's pronounced Eden. It's spelled Aleph Dud Daled Nun. It has a segol under each letter, and it's from Parshat Truma. And Eden, which you never see really in the singular in the Parsha, always in the plural, Adanim, is a socket, kind of one of the holes in which the different boards and poles of the Mishkan were resting in. That is pronounced Eden. But Ayin Daled Nun is pronounced Aden. And I realized up until then and since then, I'd never once even thought about or given a Devar Torah on the Eden, which means socket. And that changes today. Nor do I commonly quote Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneerson of Lubavitch. I have nothing against him whatsoever. I actually love his Torah. I just don't come to it a lot in my sermon prep. The Rabbi, as he was known, thought a lot about these Adanim, these Edens in the Parsha. He says, don't overlook the socket. Don't overlook the Beit Kibul, he would call it, the receptacle of all of the parts of the Mishkan that have to come together. He says that's the foundation of the whole building. If you do a little bit of construction, you know, no matter how good the design is, if the things that are resting in their places are not resting in the proper receptacle, then the whole balance is off and it's going to fall down. And he saw in all those Adanim, all those sockets, the very important Jewish concept of Kabbalat Ol, the receiving of the yoke, Y-O-K-E. Kabbalat Ol Mitzvah, the receiving of the yoke of Mitzvah. Kabbalat Ol Mishamayim, the receiving, the accepting of the yoke of the heavens. What does it mean in Jew speak to be engaged in Kabbalat Ol? It means you are offering your submission to God's will and authority. You are becoming a vessel for something higher. And he saw all of that as being connected to all those adanim, all those places in the Mishkan that receive the heaviness and the intricacy and the beauty of a building, but it's a structure on earth that's supposed to represent the structure in the heavens. And the structure in the heavens is God's place in our life. Without that submission, the foundation is unstable and the whole structure is unstable. I learned the Rebbe's read on this notion this week, but it connected me with a conversation I had about 2 years ago. I was a rabbinic mentor on a fellowship that AIPAC sponsors called the Kligfeld Fellowship that brings rabbinical students from different denominations to Israel to be exposed to all of the wonder and the complexity of the state. And it's one of the few places where rabbinical students from Reform, Conservative, Renewal, Reconstructionist, Orthodox come together and spend the time together. And I was on a bus one time on the trip talking to a rabbinical student from the Lubavitch background. And I don't often have that opportunity. And we were talking about our different philosophies of mitzvot. And he said something to me at the time which I only kind of got, and now I get more. What he basically says is that not a single religious act has any meaning whatsoever if you don't fully accept God's divine authority in your life. I didn't quite get it because it's not the way that I live. And it's not the way most or many conservative Jews live, even as we observe mitzvot. It's just not the case that I don't think that my religious act has no meaning if in the moment I don't feel a full submission to divine authority. It's more complex than that. But he said that. And it's exactly what the Rebbe taught. Unless those adanim, those sockets, are fully willing to receive all of it, no pole or board or mitzvah act means anything. It's a very stark view of Jewish practice. And very hard for a lot of moderns to deal with. Because if you're like me, you struggle at least a little bit with the idea of submitting yourself entirely to the will of a divine whose existence you cannot prove. Rabbi Jonathan Sachs of blessed memory has a wonderful take on the Rebbe's take, and in some ways restoring that notion to a Jew, even a Jew who might struggle with some of the starkness of full submission of will to the divine. And he doesn't make that connection, but I connect Rabbi Sachs's connection to Mel Brooks and the 2,000-year-old man. Raise your hand if you know a little bit about the skit. That's it? What kind of an uncultured place do we have here? Okay. Do you remember how Mel Brooks, Gabrielle remembers. Wonderful. It's become interactive. Okay, so you might remember Mel Brooks's understanding of how theology came to be, right? Originally, there was no God. There was Phil. Phil could do anything. And Phil was powerful. And Phil was everywhere. And we all thought that Phil was the highest thing there was. And then one day, lightning struck and knocks Phil down. And we said, there's something bigger than Phil. That's the 2,000-year-old man's theology in a nutshell, and it connects actually to Rabbi Sachs's understanding of the Rebbe's understanding of the sockets. He says, Kabbalat Ol, receiving the yoke, doesn't only have to refer to your individual acceptance of God's supreme authority in your life right now. It refers to the original, organic, and majestic human understanding that there is something bigger than us, that the universe is grand and masterful, and that there might be some creator who is in charge of it, and that I am not the only one who matters. He says, Kabbalat Ol, and those sockets of receptivity, this is the birth of human humility. And not the farcical way, as in the joke whose punchline is, look who thinks he's a nothing. If you don't know the joke, I'll tell it to you at Kiddush. But in a profound way, a humility that Rabbi Sachs says that has you see everyone around you and everything around you as resplendent with the presence of a divine being, and you see them bigger, and you see them brighter, and you see them more beautiful. Humility is not diminishing yourself. Humility is seeing others as greater. And when you see others as greater, when you are a receptacle for that way of living, you yourself become the greatest you could possibly be. That's a religious humility. Not self-abnegation, not self-reduction, but being willing to see everyone else's greatness so you can achieve your own. He basically says the Kabbalat Ol and all of those sockets are to train us into a state of receptivity. In his words, humility is not self-abasement. It's not self-anything. It's the ability to stand in silent awe in the presence of others, the thou of God, which is a term that Martin Buber created, the otherness of people, the majesty of creation, the beauty of the world, the power of great ideas, the call of great ideals. Humility is the silence of the self in the presence of that which is greater than the self. Very different than a Western notion of humility as imagining yourself as small. Humility is being connected to the grandeur of everything around you. And in our tradition, that grandeur is God. Final thought from Rabbi Sachs. We now understand what humility is. It is not self-abasement. It's a statement often attributed to C.S. Lewis, who put it best: humility is not thinking less of yourself. It is thinking of yourself less. You are thinking of yourself less because you are an Eden, a socket, a receptacle for all of the greatness that's around you. There is greatness in this room, and it's not me. There is greatness in our community, and it's everyone else. When you look into the eyes of someone else and treat them as if they have grandeur, that is living humbly. And ultimately, that's living as big as you can possibly live.
You've been listening to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. If you enjoy these podcasts, we invite you to write a review on the Apple Podcast website or wherever you get your podcasts. For more information on Temple Beth Am, Los Angeles, go to www.tbala.org.